Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Evening Dhamma. So, we have no meditators here. Our last meditator left this morning. It's a shame. He would have been a good one to do an interview with. Not everyone does interviews. But he did really well in the course, and he left back to Argentina this morning. Summer seems to be a lot slower. We had not so many people, but we're going to be full again next week, 2 weeks from now. So, still people interested in meditation. That hasn't stopped. But tonight, well, it got me thinking that maybe we should have some kind of structure to this all. So I was thinking Wednesdays might be a good night to answer questions and give some more impromptu Dhamma, like just some not random, but for lack of a better word, random Dhamma. And then Monday I'll do a Dhammapada, maybe try to do a Dhammapada verse every week. And then Saturday, because there's people coming, we could have a more formal talk. Maybe based on a sutta every week or on some specific Dhamma. Then I won't be answering questions. I'll answer questions once a week, Wednesdays. So it's Wednesday today. We have some questions on the site. We are broadcasting in Second Life. We have a bunch of people sitting in Second Life. Hello, everyone. Maybe Wednesdays will be more interactive. I'll actually look and see who's here and talk to y'all. So if anyone has any questions, you can post them in various places. I'll answer questions from Second Life. Not sure about YouTube, but won't we have 39 people watching on YouTube? Good evening, everyone. Okay, well, let's get started with the questions on... Oh, I know what I was going to do before the questions. I was going to talk a little bit about current events. Maybe Wednesday will be a good time to talk about current events as well. Some interesting things happening in North America. The first one is regarding racism, I think is the topic. And so there's been a uptick in I was talking about this recently. People can, and the way I put it, I said, if you want to put it nicely, it's people concerned about their culture. I mean, if you think about why these people are so overtly racist, or it's not, don't even have to use that word, but horrible, terrible. It seems to be, and I guess I'm not. I can't really talk about what's actually going on. I not really in touch with what's going on, but there are people acting horribly, and it seems to be a concern for their culture. It's kind of a myth, really. We have these myths, these ideas about who we are, It's a lot of identity and ego. And there's a fear of the unknown, and there's a set way of viewing the world that is threatened by people looking at the world differently from us, right? It's not just racism. It's sort of, well, a big thing is the immigration in America. It's been fueled by a number of foreigners. I would say people from the Middle East, Mexico. It's been fueled by the Black Lives Matter movement, I think. A backlash, maybe. But it's also about things like homosexuality and this whole gender debate about transgender and a third gender, and letting people go in the wrong washroom, not the wrong washroom, go in whatever washroom they want. It's also, there's this concern over the past, statues. There's a lot here that's interesting, I think, as a Buddhist. First of all, the fear and the clinging, right? People cling so strongly to illusion, really. Strongly to a sense of self that becomes very important. We spend a lot of time reaffirming who we are. We, I mean they, it's really not a we. But people in this world spend a lot of time reaffirming who they are with their group. We call it a wind tunnel, right? Where you don't hear any dissenting views, you only hear your own culture. You visit the same websites, you have the same friends, you go to the same parties, you associate with the same people. That's why traveling is quite interesting. I think there's something objectively good about traveling. From a conceptual point of view, it helps broaden your horizons. Anything that takes you out of your comfort zone and gives you a chance to step back and look at the truth of who you are is useful. I think travel does that to an extent. Travel shows you how ridiculous people are, because wherever you go you see how ridiculous cultures are. And it's a shock to realize that your culture is no different. You'll go to another country, and you see people doing all sorts of strange and ridiculous things, and then it hits you that your country is no different. Your culture is no different. I think it's useful to try and see things in a positive light, in the sense of try and understand why people do vile and villainous things. Why people are awful. Get an understanding of why they're that way. They talk about this like knots, right? You know, this famous verse where the angel comes to the Buddha and asks him, says, these people are entangled with a tangle. They're all tied up in knots, internally, externally. And think of it as knots to be untied. We do our best. We do our work to try and untie these knots. This issue is mostly about ego, I would say. And the things that reaffirm our ego, reaffirm our sense of identity, and our clinging to identity to the point where anything that threatens it, anything that is seen as a threat, anything that's different, that challenges the supremacy of who we are and what we are, that threatens to change it, really, right? We're afraid of other cultures because they might wash away our culture. So no, people are. I'm not, obviously, but well, Buddhists are actually as well, right? Buddhists are often very afraid. In Sri Lanka, there's a great fear of the Tamils. In Burma, even there's this fear of the Muslims. Thailand, there's a great fear. People are afraid of losing their identity. Causes them to do all sorts of wicked and evil things. Buddhists in Burma, some Buddhists in Burma are acting quite vile from the sounds of it. Yeah, it's not just Buddhists, of course. And so there's this interesting aspect of this story regarding statues. And the question came up, the first Prime Minister of Canada was overtly racist, genocidal, and he's on our $10 bill. There's schools named after him and statues of him and all these kinds of things. And I think it's an interesting question. It doesn't seem like this is something Buddhists should worry about, this figure from the past. Of course, we don't dwell on the past. But it's interesting to talk about how things are viewed and how identities are formed. Because the identity of Canada, Canadian, is something holy, sacred. Sacred to Canadians. It's like American, being American to an American, although even better because Canada's actually has a good reputation. So people are proud of being a Canadian. And the First Nations people here, the Aboriginal people here in Canada have been doing an interesting job trying to remind us that Canada is really just a bunch of thieves and genocidal colonialists. It's interesting. It's an interesting question because there's many otherwise good people who become foaming at the mouth, mad, angry about the challenge to Canada and the challenge to John A. Macdonald. They call it ridiculous, political correctness to an extreme, and calling us snowflakes. I'd laugh now when I hear this term snowflake. It's meant as a derogatory term, criticize. You're all just a bunch of snowflakes. But we are all snowflakes. That's what's, it's I'm on the other side where I say, yes, we are all snowflakes, and that's important. It is important. You can't lump people together and have this cynical outlook of trying to say, get in line, right? Go with the flow. And past is past. Deal with it. It's insensitive and it's ignorant. So it's an important question. Being a Buddhist is a good thing to think about. You could, to some extent, say it's good to be proud of being a Buddhist, to the extent that calling yourself Buddhist reminds you of certain good things, right? So the question is, does calling yourself Canadian do the same thing? And for most people, most Canadians would say, yes, Canada's all about this and that and the other good thing, right? But it's not. Being Canada is, to many people, it's about genocide and racism towards the Aboriginals, towards the Chinese. Yeah. And John A. Macdonald he certainly wasn't a bastion of light, and it's like the Dajjaka Sutta where the Buddha says, Sakka, king of the gods, says to the angels, when you get scared, look at my flag, and by remembering me, the fear will go. And the Buddha said, well, it might or it might not, because Sakka is not such a good role model. He's full of greed, anger, and delusion. There's nothing great about him. And so it's a question about role models. If someone has overtly advocated, explicitly advocated genocide and racism, not exactly the kind of person you want to put on your $10 bill or make a statue of or name a school after. So I think there's an argument to be made there. From a Buddhist point of view, because we think about the Buddha. The Buddha said, think about me when you're scared. Just like Sakka said to the angels, when you're scared, think of me, because I am free from greed, anger, and delusion, he said. And so when you think of me, the fear will go. And role models are important. And identities, to some extent, are useful. Now, I wouldn't quite go that far, but they're important in the sense that they're generally important in a negative sense. They're an important part of our suffering. Our identity causes us suffering. When it's threatened, when our identity is threatened. We think it's good to be Canadian, and then when anyone suggests otherwise, we become arrogant and conceited, and it doesn't do any good. It just makes you afraid of what's different, afraid of losing your culture, and afraid of the threat to your culture, to who you are, and so on. I would say identity is very much at the root of things like racism and bigotry in general. So that's an interesting issue. That's just some mullings about it that I think make it a little bit Buddhist to talk about. What was the other issue? Oh, there's the natural disaster. There's a big hurricane in Texas. A lot of suffering there. Helping out with the floods, helping out with doing whatever you can to help is a great thing. It's a support for your meditation practice. If anyone has time or resources that they can dedicate to that, it's that kind of thing that makes you feel good about yourself. Makes you think that you're changing the world, not just because of the immediate relief, but because of the nature of good acts. If people stop doing good deeds, goodness will fade away. Who will be an example? How will people know good from bad if no one ever does any good deeds? Right? We do the good deed, and hey, it's a good thing, but it's even greater in the fact that it encourages other people then to go and do good deeds. So it snowballs. If people stop doing good, then the world becomes full of evil. We're always in this fight, good and evil. They're always warring inside of us and in the world around us. And if we stop doing good, evil will win. So don't stop doing good. The Buddha said, Ma bhikkhave bhayita punyanam. Don't be afraid of goodness. Goodness is another word for happiness. It's a quote from the Buddha. It's a really good one. All right, enough talking. Let's answer some questions and then go home. My sister is pregnant with her first child. She is also a practicing Buddhist. She's been asking me how to introduce the kid to Buddhism. I was wondering what your advice is on how to bring up a child into Buddhism from birth. What concepts at what age and so forth. Okay. Well, the 5 precepts are, you don't want to necessarily drill them into the kid like commandments, but something to keep in mind as the kid is growing up. Those and mindfulness. If you've watched my videos on how to meditate for kids, the how to meditate for kids or something like that. No, how to meditate for children. I've told this story before, how one of my students taught it to her 3 and 5-year-old daughters. And the 5-year-old was reminding the 3-year-old, or the 3-year-old was reminding the 5-year-old. No, the 5-year-old was reminding the 3-year-old how to do it. So they really picked up the concept of mindfulness at 3 and 5 years old. I mean, anything younger than that, and it's just getting a little bit silly. There's not much. I think an important thing, though, from early on is to not give in to this need to please. Thinking about this, if you think about what goes on in those early years, most parents are all about coddling their children, doing whatever they can to please them. I've never had kids, and I understand it's a really difficult task to raise a child. Not something I would ever, well, it's not an easy task. And so I would, to the extent that it's possible, just always keep in mind that every time you please the child, you're encouraging pleasure. You're encouraging addiction to pleasure. It doesn't mean that you should ever deny your kids things, but it's very easy for kids to become spoiled, and then that's what creates this stress as kids grow up, or that's part of it anyway, is their early on, their recognition that parents are there to make me happy, and they become petulant and upset when they don't get their way. So throughout childhood, I would keep that in mind, that pleasing your kids is, it's not the answer. It's not the solution to the problems. That sometimes it's all you can do, and giving your kids what they want is necessary. But you have to keep in mind that that's not what's going to make them happy. It's not what's going to encourage them to be good people. So I guess, the idea is to be patient with them and teach them patience to the extent possible, that sometimes they're just going to cry. And stopping your kids from crying at any extent, at any, at all cost, is the wrong approach. Allowing them to cry and to learn and to understand that, hey, wait a minute, this crying thing is causing me stress and suffering. To some extent they're going to start to realize that crying is not a way to get what you want. Crying is just stressful. Make them more patient and bring peace, because they stop reacting so violently. If every time they cry you give them what they want, it reinforces this. That's an interesting point about why we think that anger and disliking is somehow useful. Because since we were young, it got us what we want. There's some ideas. It's a tough job. It's a difficult task to raise a child. Especially because you don't know if they're going to be receptive. Maybe they're sort of a person who has no interest in Buddhism, right? That would be a shame. Not very likely if you're both practicing Buddhists. It's possible. While noting the rising and falling of the belly, sometimes a thought arises. I can stay focused on my noting and ignore the thought, and it pretty much disappears, or I can note the thought, which makes me unaware of my breathing. Focus seems to define the noting during my practice. It might be a delusion, but I feel that focus is under my control in a way. This breaks my objective observation and makes me an active participant. There's no question there. I feel that focus is under my control. Okay, well, when you think about something, the breath isn't important. There's nothing special about it. Don't worry about watching the stomach rise and fall. When you're thinking, focus on the thought, and when it's gone, then come back to the stomach. We're trying to be flexible. Part of the purpose of the practice is to help you keep up with the present moment, to not get caught up or stuck on one thing. So when your mind is thinking, don't worry about the stomach, focus on the thought. The second question, what's focus? Focus is concentration. It's when you stick with the same object for more than one moment. And there's many causes for it. You can force your mind to stay with something for a little while. But through mindfulness, it will come naturally. So there's meditations where you repeatedly focus on a specific object, like you take the stomach rising, falling. Eventually, because you work so much at it, your mind becomes focused on it, because it's a habit. Focus is caused by different causes, but in mindfulness meditation, focus is caused by repetition, and through repetition, it becomes more familiar, more familiar, and so it comes more often, the same object. So it appears that you're focusing on an object, when in fact, you're just becoming accustomed to that object. And moreover, the qualities of mind improve, and those qualities are bright and clear, and so it appears that you're much more in focus. So that's another type of focus, is the clarity of mind. As you're more mindful, your mind becomes more clear, and your awareness of things becomes more clear. And that's a different sort of focus. I take antipsychotic medication, and I practice meditation with the hope that my future life will be in a healthy brain. Is this a reasonable goal? Yes, I mean that's a reasonable goal. It's not unreasonable. I mean, you should be also, I would recommend also practicing meditation to gain benefit in this life, even with your current brain. And to whatever extent you can, overcoming the need for medication. I mean, I don't know if I've said this before, but I think a lot of people who are on medication don't technically need to be, if they could come to terms with their situation. Now, for people who are on antipsychotics, I understand it's a whole other category of problem. The brain is somehow not quite healthy, as you say. So I don't know. I don't have hands-on experience of what that's like. Even having, I haven't had any meditators who I could say were psychotic, and I've helped them deal with it. But a lot of the paranoia and the strong emotions, they are not the psychosis. It's possible to experience the stimuli from the brain without reacting to them. I mean, that's the challenge. For some people, it's not going to be possible. They're have such strong emotions. But that's what I would work at. I would work at your emotions of fear and anger and whatever else there is in the mind. That's with everyone. And so the idea of being reborn with a healthy mind is important for all of us. It's something we should all think about. It comes from meditation for sure. It comes from things like goodness as well, because good deeds, being kind to others and being ethical and moral, these help to focus the mind. They help to straighten the mind. Morality is a very important part. If you dedicate yourself to wholesome deeds and keeping just the 5 precepts, something to be proud of, something to feel good about. You shouldn't feel like your brain is broken or you're a broken person. That's not helpful. We're all kind of broken, but those kind of thoughts are not useful when you look down on yourself and think about yourself with hatred. Feel bad, feel self-conscious about yourself. It's not useful, and that is unhealthy. So, be encouraged. The fact that you're even asking this question is a wonderful thing, and it's the practice of meditation, moment after moment, that indeed leads to health. Do animal products have negative energy to them? There's no such thing as negative energy. Energy is energy. We use terms like negative energy. It's interesting. What we mean, I guess, is something that comes from negativity, which would be greed, anger, or delusion. So, because of the anger and the delusion and the greed associated with killing animals, is that negativity going to come to us when we make use of animal products? I mean, it completely depends on our own minds, but I think certainly it's possible. Some people might feel very guilty and very sad when they use animal products, and that's negative. Those things are negative. But it's really up to the individual. It has nothing to do with the actual product. It has to do with your reaction to it. And if you keep an open mind, really, dead is dead, Feeling sad isn't going to bring the animals back, and everything dies. All animals die, and so on. Making use of animal products is really just like making use of anything else. Everything is dead, and everything has been recycled. It's just rupa. It's just physical matter. If you think objectively about it, if you have a problem with the animal industry, then go and do something about it. Teach people to stop killing. Or you can boycott animal products, but the actual animal products themselves have nothing. There's nothing bad about them. What would happen if someone has fear during the process of death? Fear is a common feeling that almost everyone has towards death. Well, fear is anger-based, so if it's intense, it can lead to hell. I mean, it would be intense in someone who has done really bad deeds, because they would just freak them out as they start to realize that there's a reckoning, that all that evil inside of them hasn't gone anywhere, it's still there, and there'd be a great fear, and that sort of fear would lead to hell, most likely. People who have done horrible deeds, or continue to do horrible deeds. Anger leads to hell. So, but if it's weak, it would lead to things like ugliness, sickness. Someone who was born with I'm just conjecturing, but some sort of sickness, that kind of thing. It would be like because fear, you have to ask yourself, what is fear like? And you can sort of get a sense of what it would do to the rebirth. So most of these things that lead to, we talk about what leads to hell, what leads to the animal realms, what leads to being a ghost, they all have their parallels in the human realm. So if someone's reborn as a human, it'll be like being born in hell, that kind of thing. It'll be like it in some way. Whether it's fear, anger, delusion. Like someone with lots of greed would be born maybe very poor as a human, or they would have a lot of problems getting what they want. It's all conjecture. If one has fear during the time that they're going to die, they should be mindful of it. If they're mindful of it, it can be a great... Like there was this monk who was afraid, he cut his throat, and then he was afraid because he realized he wasn't enlightened, and that fear pushed him to be mindful as he was dying, and he became enlightened. Is the view of self necessary at the moment of liking or disliking an experience, or can these be simply the result of judgment of some experience? Good question. In liking, with liking it can either be present or not present. There's two kinds. The Abhidhamma deals with this specifically. With anger, there is no view of self. At the moment of disliking, there's technically no view of self. It doesn't really explain a lot. That's very technical. Involved with both of them in the process, right? Because liking something or disliking something is not just one moment, it's many moments. And throughout those moments, there will most certainly be, depending on the individual, depending on the experience, there can be, even with disliking, this view of self. But a view of self is in and of itself just a thing, you know. It's not the liking or disliking. It can lead to great liking or disliking, view of self. But at the moment of liking or disliking, at the moment of liking there can be, it's called ditthigata sampayuttam. So there is an association between liking and views. So possessiveness and that kind of thing can have very much to do with the view of self. Recently I had the insight that my meditation feels far more principled than usual, and that I seem to be observing less when meditating. This seems to be creating some mental clutter. I don't understand far more principled, and I don't understand I seem to be observing less when meditating. I mean, I'd recommend reading my booklet on how to meditate if you haven't already. If you have, then just follow the booklet. It's quite simple. I mean, your meditation quality is going to change. It's going to get better, get worse. It's going to seem like it's getting better, seem like it's getting worse. But it's just change, and change is part of what we want to see. So if you feel meditation feels different from before, then be mindful of what's new. And so you have mental clutter, then be mindful of it. Balance is an illusion. There's change. Your mind is always going to change. Asking about balance is like asking for things to always stay the same. You want balance, stop trying to keep things the same, and you have to keep up with the new experiences as things change. This is so uncomfortable to ask, but the person I loved the most killed themselves. I actually said something to them that I know contributed to their low self-worth and suicide. How do I ever get over contributing to killing, causing suffering to the person I love? Do you think self-love meditation helps? There is a lifelong criminal punishment for murder, so I can't help feeling that when I love myself, it is unjust and not the fair thing to do. So if you tell someone, hey, you should kill yourself, then from a Buddhist point of view, you can be culpable for murder. If you didn't do that, you probably did something bad. So suppose someone had low self-esteem when you called them ugly, and then they killed themselves. This was someone you loved, so out of anger, you lash out at them, you manipulate them out of greed, you abuse them out of delusion, arrogance, and so on. But we do all that, that's part of the problem of who we are. I mean, how do you solve that? Get rid of those things inside of you. Part of the practice is coming to terms with the fact that we're doing bad things all the time, and becoming horrified by that, and shocked by it, and working really hard to change that. It doesn't help to feel guilty about things you've done in the past. You acknowledge that you contributed to their low self-worth, okay, acknowledged. What you should do is, when you feel guilty, when you feel sad, when you feel angry towards yourself, you should be mindful of those things, because they're here and now. And if you can untie those knots, well, you'll go a long way towards becoming a better person. Beating yourself up doesn't make you a better person. It tends to make you a more bitter person and stressed person, and more likely to be a bad person again in the future. I don't think self-love meditation is particularly useful. I wouldn't do too much about that. You're worthless. We're all worthless. Just learn to let go of that fact. Let go of yourself. Get over yourself, someone said. What we have to do is get over ourselves. You don't have to love yourself as a means of overcoming the hatred. Hatred is ego. You hate yourself, it means you have an ego. You have a way you want to be, the self that you would like to be. You don't like this self. This self doesn't exist, so get over it. Not to be unkind. I don't mean to be dismissive, but really that's the practice, is to slowly work at getting over yourself. I was considering getting laser eye surgery. Well, it would be freeing and I will have clear vision. It's clinging to good vision. What is your perspective on this? Well, I got laser eye surgery. For me, it was more eyeglasses. I couldn't buy my own eyeglasses. And I was spending time in the forest. And so it's not just about, like, if my eyeglasses broke when I was in the forest, how can you walk through the forest watching out for snakes and ants and all these things? So I asked a monk about it, and he said, oh yeah, a lot of forest monks are getting their eyes done now, are getting this laser surgery. So that sort of pushed me to talk about it to my supporters, and one of my supporters in Bangkok paid for it. Or a bunch of them put together some money, and someone else took up the rest. I mean, it's a one-time thing. What I realized was eyeglasses are kind of the complication. And when you talk about laser eye surgery, it's really, though it's not entirely necessary, it's curing a ailment. Curing a sickness, a disease, to some extent. Your eyes are diseased. I mean, they're not. They're crooked, kind of. But you're curing that. And so it's not wrong. It's just, the real problem with it is that it's expensive. Or it used to be. It probably still is fairly expensive. But it's a one-time thing, and what it does is, so much, I don't have to concern myself with glasses anymore. Where are they? Am I going to step on them? Because I spend a lot of time on the floor, I end up putting my glasses on the floor, and I've stepped on them before, so that kind of thing. They get scratched, you lose them, you don't know where they are, and you have to look for them. All of that is, good meditation practice to cultivate mindfulness, but it's not like once you've done it, you're going to be attached to good sight. You're just going to forget about it, and it's going to make your life more simple. So I think, there's the positives there. I don't think it's like teeth, If you're worried about crooked teeth, well, that's something you should be mindful about and let go of it. I don't think getting braces is particularly Buddhist, I'm sorry to say. But vision is different. Vision is something useful. I mean, if you don't have it, it's fine. I mean, my teacher is quite blind, and he's had surgery for cataracts and so on. And we're all going to go blind eventually. Most of us are not going to be able to read, and we'll need glasses anyway. But it's, I think there are positives to it. I don't feel guilty having had the surgery, except for the fact that it was fairly expensive. How mindfulness can lead to happiness and peace. I have stress and suffering from time to time. Well, mindfulness helps you understand the stress and suffering, and help you see how your reactions are causing you stress and suffering. So by being mindful, you'll start to see clearly what you're doing to yourself. And if you're mindful enough, again and again and again, you'll start to get dispassionate about it. Or there's no really good word. I mean, to encompass this idea of losing the excitement, losing the reactivity. You start to become less reactive because you get bored of it, basically. You get tired of it, and your mind loses the excitement that you were cultivating. Why is someone quoting Ananda? That's not a question. Are you vegan, vegetarian? Thanks, just curious. No. I'm generally, I try to stay away from meat, but I'm not that concerned about it. How much concentration meditation would you recommend alongside mindfulness meditation? I'm wary of becoming attached to concentration and developing a stone Buddha syndrome. I only teach one type of meditation. You're welcome to practice loving kindness and mindfulness of the Buddha, mindfulness of death, mindfulness of the body, the parts of the body. Those are all supportive meditations. But I'd really only recommend one as your main practice, and that's mindfulness. It seems that mindfulness is an object of focus. A lot of things going on in parallel from body sensations. Being mindful of my breathing is me choosing to focus on my breathing in a way. Is being mindful of something a result of choosing to focus on that something? Yeah, you shouldn't do that. That's the thing. You should focus on whatever's there. So if you're thinking and you realize you're thinking, the next moment should be you saying to yourself, thinking. If you feel pain, it should be pain. Now once you've done that, we do make an intention, and this is just kind of a technical procedure. Once it's gone, come back to the stomach. That's not mindfulness, but that's kind of a focusing or kind of a forcing and a controlling in a sense. But it's very, very weak and very simple. It's just structural or functional. You put some structure to your meditation when you say, okay, I'm always going to come back to the stomach. Keeps you from getting too distracted. It's useful, especially in the beginning. Okay, that's all the questions on the site. I promised that I would go and check if people ask questions elsewhere, so let's go and see. Hello, YouTube. How do we know we have piti? I wouldn't worry about whether you have piti. Whatever experience you have, try and be mindful of that. Echo chambers. Okay. Yes, it wasn't wind chambers. Piti during meditation and the next stage before first jhana. Well, I don't teach those kind of jhanas, so I'm not probably the best person to ask. I do not see why I should try to end my suffering. Suffering give my life meaning, I think. Okay. By suffering, we mean that which you don't like. So if you like certain things, suffering can give your life meaning, so that's fine. But what we're trying to get rid of is anger, greed, and delusion. If you think greed, anger, and delusion are good for you, then you're wrong. But if you think suffering can be good for you, well, suffering doesn't lead to suffering, so you're not wrong. It's greed, anger, and delusion that lead to suffering. So they're never good. That's how you should see it. Islam and Muslims are very dangerous. Well, greed, anger, and delusion are really dangerous. Some Muslims are not so dangerous, or not dangerous at all. Some Muslims are very good people, I think. Current events. He didn't like my news, I guess. This is why I don't come on YouTube. You people. Oh, you're talking. People are talking to me. Well, I've moved on, huh? All right, enough of YouTube. Let's go see what's happening in Second Life. Is it good to identify with love as in metta? As long as it is not identity, belief in goodness is love. I don't understand what it means to identify with love. I am love. I love. It's not useful. You should just love and not think I love. Identifying is not useful. Okay, enough. I'm gonna run away while I still can. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you for tuning in.